And for more now, I'm joined by Bonnie Glaser. She's director of the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. She joins me tonight from Reston, Virginia. It's good to have you on the program. Let me just get your take on the tone of these talks. I mean, I described it at the beginning of the show as being testy. I mean, that's what it seemed like if you were listening to it as an American. How would you read the talks?
I would agree with you. The tone sounds similar to what we heard when senior U.S. and Chinese officials met in Anchorage several months ago. There was really, I think, a focus on presenting their complaints, their grievances to the other side. But this time, the Chinese in particular went even further. They said that essentially cooperation is going to be difficult unless the United States stops doing things that China doesn't like interfering in its internal affairs and its sovereignty issues. But they also presented the U.S. side with 16 demands, very specific things that the United States has to change. So the relationship is contentious, it's very rocky, and the prospects for cooperation, even in areas where their interests might overlap, are really very uncertain at this particular moment.
And how much of this contentiousness would you say has to do with the fact that there's a different U.S. president right now? I'm just thinking if we compare the tone with former President Trump to what we've got right now with the Biden administration.
Well, there's no doubt that the Chinese had hoped for a different approach from the Biden administration, not only a friendlier tone, but also a removal of the tariffs and generally a more moderate set of policies. But we really have not seen that coming from the Biden administration. So I think the Chinese are on their back foot a little bit. They see the United States cooperating, coordinating with allies around the world, certainly in Europe, but also Japan and Australia. There were statements last week by many of U.S. allies about Chinese cyber hacking and condemning their hacking of the Microsoft exchange. That happened a few months ago. Then there were some common positions that were taken on forced labor in Xinjiang, which many of our allies, including those in Europe, stand very strongly against having Chinese companies in their supply chains that are actually using Uyghurs that have been imprisoned and are really not working voluntarily. So there's a lot of issues in the U.S.-China relationship, and I think that the Chinese are a bit surprised that the Biden administration's approach is in some ways very similar to the Trump administration.
And we have heard, though, that the Biden administration has identified China as its biggest foreign policy concern. So what role then are these meetings, what role are they playing if it's not to try to avoid what would be an otherwise inevitable conflict?
Well, from the U.S. perspective, U.S. officials have said they want to put in place guardrails. They want to prevent the competition from spiraling out of control. They want to talk about code of conduct. There's been reports about maybe establishing a new hotline between presidents and making it more routine and reliable. I think the Chinese are very skeptical about moving forward with any of these things. And some of the quotes from Chinese officials suggest that they, again, have preconditions before they enter into these kind of discussions with the United States. Mm-hmm. So they are, to some extent, talking past each other. But at least dialogue is taking place. Mm-hmm. I think that this will be followed by more dialogue. And there are reports that perhaps in October, President Biden will meet with China's leader, Xi Jinping. But it's interesting that at this particular round of discussions, the U.S. side said that possible engagement between the top leaders was not even discussed.
Yeah, that is interesting. It wasn't even listed in the printout that came from the State Department following those talks. When we look at what has been happening just recently in China and the U.S., and I'm talking about extreme weather that's related to climate change, doesn't this show both countries that they need each other, that they have to cooperate there if they want to stop climate change? Shouldn't that be enough to bring them to the table?
Well, I suppose we could say it should be. There's no doubt that Chinese leaders are worried about global warming. And they have set some targets for reducing their emissions and becoming carbon neutral by 2060. The United States, of course, along with European leaders, would like China to bring those targets and commitments forward to a shorter time frame. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why you could argue that China has common interests with the U.S., but actually getting those two countries to work together on anything, I think, is going to be very difficult. Not impossible, but the relationship right now is so heated, so negative, so mistrustful, that it's just hard to see how we're going to have a positive path that's going to produce any real concrete cooperation.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that meeting in October takes place at all. Bonnie Glaser, Director of the Asia Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Bonnie, it's always good talking with you. We appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.